Sometimes I get a little creeped out by these portraits,
said the pretty girl to her friend.
It's like they're watching us closely.
You watch too many horror movies.
She shook her head.
No, I'm not the only one who's noticed it.
Okay, calm down. It's just someone else's portraits.
That same night, a terrible scream cut through the silence. It was full of fear, pain, and disbelief. The people who came running to the noise found the dead body of a girl with her eyes wide open. There was no one else in the room besides her. The preliminary report of death was a massive heart attack. Simply put, died of fear. This house was built over 100 years ago by a famous architect. The annex, which is in the garden, was often used by the Count's guests. Later it was the Countess's workshop. During the Great Patriotic War, orphans were brought here.
A quiet, historic neighborhood. Everything is within walking distance.
Why so cheap?
Well, the woman hesitated. You see, there has been no repairs for a long time. No one has lived here for almost 30 years. The mansion was put up for sale, but the new owner decided to rent it out for now. Perhaps then they will start restoration, but it's such a beautiful building.
And the communications?
Everything works, do not doubt,
assured the realtor. They talked in the courtyard. The future tenants went inside alone. Nastya and Rita looked around and agreed. Clean, old-fashioned, everything there is for life, and most importantly the price. They had very little money for the two of them, and they would have to go to work in a week. Both came from the district center in search of a better life. In her village, Nastya worked in a greenhouse and Rita worked as a sales clerk. The friends thought about it and decided that they needed to change their lives radically. Neither Nastya nor Rita had a family or children, although both were in their 30s, so they were free as birds. Before moving, they found several options for housing at their own expense. They also found a job quickly. After looking at 2 apartments, they refused. One was a real bedbug among the marginal residents of the neighborhood, and in the other, cockroaches roamed the rooms. This estate was their last option, and the best part is that the price is very low. They had expected to see ruin for that kind of money, and they were very surprised. After signing the lease and seeing the realtor off, the girls took another look at the estate. The main house, the former carriage barn, and an outbuilding in the garden. The garden was overgrown with weeds, but that gave it a special charm. There were only 2 rooms in the annex, in which there was nothing else but paintings. In the main house there were 4 more rooms besides the kitchen, bathroom, and toilet. The manor itself stood on a hill, and from the wooden terrace there was a beautiful view of the mountains and the city. A huge old fir tree leaned its branches towards the roof as if guarding the house and its inhabitants. The furnishings in the house were, to the girls' eyes, old-fashioned and poor, as they say, poor but clean. In fact, almost all the furnishings and furniture could be safely attributed to antiques, and some things, and in general, to the rarities. But the new tenants did not know either art or antiques. A notable detail of the estate is the many paintings, particularly portraits. From small watercolors to heavy-framed oil paintings. They hung everywhere, and in one of the rooms all the walls were densely hung with portraits.
Look, it's not just paintings. Look, there are old photographs too.
Nastya froze in front of a shelf with a lot of pictures.
Yeah, it's like a fucking museum. At school they dragged me to museums and I was bored, but now I'm going to live among them. Let's have dinner and go to bed. We've had a long day. Tomorrow we'll put things in order and we'll get through the night somehow.
The girls had dinner and lay down in the same room on the sofas opposite each other. After chatting, they both fell asleep quickly because they were tired. Suddenly, as if out of thin air, there appeared a woman in an early 20th century dress, white skin, neat hair, and black eyes, which stared at the sleeping girls. The stranger looked at the girls, even sniffed, but did not approach. And with the first rays of the sun, she seemed to disappear into a dark corner.
How'd you sleep?
I didn't feel good. It was like someone was staring at me the whole time. It's not nice,
complained Nastya.
We have a few more days. We'll tidy everything up, wash it. Maybe after that it won't be so dull and gray here.
I don't know. The portraits make me uncomfortable, as if they were staring at me.
Nastya shivered. There were paintings hanging in the kitchen as well, and except for a few nice still lifes, the rest were portraits.
I wonder what kind of crazy artist lived here. I think all these portraits are of people who are strangers to him.
What do we care? Can we put them in one room and not go there?
Let's do it.
The girls spent the rest of the day cleaning. They put all the portraits and paintings in one room and it became easier, as if a weight had been dropped. In the evening, there was a thunderstorm outside. The trees were bending under the gusts of wind. The downpour was a wall of rain. Suddenly, the light flickered and went out, and Rita went looking for matches.
There must be a break in the line somewhere.
I saw candles in the kitchen table.
A few minutes later, Rita returned with the candles. Suddenly, Nastya froze and signaled to her friend to be quiet. She was listening to something. Her face was frightened. Rita obediently kept silent, looking at her friend.
Someone is walking there.
Which room?
With the portraits.
They both listened. Indeed, behind the closed door in the darkness, someone was walking. And judging by the footsteps, there was more than one person. Nastya clutched at her friend's arm with such force that she grimaced in pain. The door swung open, and they saw a dark, tall silhouette. It was a woman in an ancient dress with a pale face. The girls recoiled in horror at the uninvited guest. At the same moment, an invisible force threw the friends to the other end of the room. From the impact, both lost consciousness.
Are you alive?
Nastya whispered, standing over Rita. Dawn was breaking outside the window.
I'm alive.
What was that stuffed animal?
How should I know? But I saw her in the portrait in that room.
The only thing missing was ghosts.
It was like she was real.
After all, the place is historical. I think they will tell us both the truth and fairy tales.
Suggested Nastya. They arrived at the museum when it opened, and they were right on time. Iraida Semyonovna, a local historian, and researcher of the museum, turned out to be not only a professional, but also a great talker. She invited the girls into the back room and offered tea before starting her story.
Her name was Agrafena Tarasova, the Count's daughter, the Count's widow. The titular person had the reputation of being a flighty, somewhat crazy girl. She was fiery and angry, but there were periods of calm when she was gentle and affectionate. She was beautiful in face, slender in figure, and relatively young. She became a widow at the age of 22, inheriting her husband's money and real estate. She was regularly sought after, for a rich, beautiful widow seemed a tidbit at a bride fair. Only Grunya didn't want to get married. She didn't even want to get married the first time, but her father insisted. Now she was free. No husband, no father. As a child, Agrafena took drawing lessons, and he noted her talent. Later, she seriously got carried away. The paintings were a success. Soon she had her own studio. Grunya began to write portraits. There were a lot of people willing, but often the girl wrote ordinary people, sometimes came up on the street and offered her to pose. Years went by. Grunya, from an eccentric artist, turned into a real city madwoman. People who posed for her disappeared or died. Bad rumors crept around the city, and Grunya became frankly afraid and avoided. Then the artist locked herself in the manor, disbanded all the servants except for the faithful nanny, and began to paint her self-portrait. For a year, Agrafena painted her own portrait, and when she finished, called the nanny to show. That same night, Grunya killed herself in front of her self-portrait. Since then, the estate has been in a state of devilry. After the death of the Countess, her entire fortune was inherited by her own brother, who arrived from another province with his family. The family left in a hurry a month later. It was said that they heard footsteps, rustles, moans from the room with the portraits, where the Countess committed suicide. Time passed, the owners of the estate changed, but no one dared to throw away a single painting or household object. The passage of time seemed to be frozen in this place. By the way, no one could live there for a long time, and constant accidents and deaths scared everyone away from the estate.
It's all understandable, but at the same time it doesn't make sense. We both saw the Countess, but she's dead. And all the others, these shadows, we see them too. There's nowhere to go but outside, so we either deal with this damn thing or go back to our collective farm.
There is such a black right, having spent which part of the soul remains in a certain place tied to an object. Ideally, if it will be his own image. Agrafena had as an assistant her nanny, who was rumoured to be a witch. On the self-portrait, and on the portraits of other artists, Grunya looks very young, and I'll believe it. They say that by depicting a person, an artist steals a part of his soul and life. And what if Agrafena knew some secret that allowed her to stay young and beautiful, stealing other people's souls, said the old woman.
How do you know so much?
I'm a historian and a local historian, and everyone in our town knows about Countess Tarasova. Besides, the estate is notorious among the people. Imagine that, having drawn portraits of many people, having stolen their souls, she locked them in one place. Over the years, the concentration of grief, pain, and hatred has reached unprecedented proportions. They're like a battery to her. The energy from these portraits gives her the power to materialize.
Why did she kill herself?
Who knows? Shrugged her shoulders. She was definitely not herself.
How to get rid of it all?
To be honest, I only know the theory from books. Embarrassed historian.
Well, at least tell me the theory. Ask the girls.
By evening they were home, laden with shopping bags and armfuls of pink thorny flowers. In search of blooming thistles, they searched almost all the neighborhood. They cut the flowers with scissors and old pruning shears, then bought up almost all the rock salt in the nearest store. The conspiracy was transcribed from a notebook the local historian had given them. As darkness fell, both were visibly nervous. There was a rustle of a dress, a quiet sigh, light footsteps approaching the door of the portrait room. A moment more and the Countess would appear.
It's time, Rita whispered faintly.
The Countess saw her friends at once, and a fierce hatred and longing radiated from her. The dead woman raised her hand, and Rita wheezed. An unprecedented force was strangling her, tearing her body from the floor.
Flowers, Rita wheezed.
Nastya threw a branch of thistle at the Countess. She dropped her victim and hissed as if she was hurt. Rita sat on the floor trying to catch her breath. So by throwing a few branches of flowering thistle, the girl managed to chase the dead woman away for a while. But no sooner had they exhaled than she reappeared. The next moments were horrible. Nastya generally thought it was their last minutes of life. Terror, pain spread through her body, stiffening it. Both girls felt the life draining out of them, drop by drop. Rita reached for the bag of salt and the leaf. Nastya, gathering her last strength, threw the remaining flowers at the Countess. Nastya and Rita, taking advantage of the respite, engaged in the ritual. Afraid that theory might be at odds with practice, they began to recite the incantation. At some point, the Countess grabbed Nastya's arm. The girl screamed, unable to withstand the pain. Her hand was burned as if by nitrogen. At dawn, the ritual was completed. Half dead from the tension, they entered the portrait room.
Look!
Nastya and her friends stared in amazement at the Countess's self-portrait. It was much brighter now. It even seemed to glow.
It's time for a barbecue.
In the courtyard of the manor stood two men, one with a box of matches in his hand, the other with a canister of fuel. The portraits were stacked in a big pile in the middle. Nastya struck a match and threw it on the pictures doused with gasoline. The portraits burst into flames instantly. Paints crackled, sighs and groans were heard. Before the girls' eyes, a white cloud separated from the burning portraits and dissolved.
It's their souls, Rita whispered. In the meantime, almost all the paintings were burned, and there was only one portrait left, which was lying on the ground. Throwing it into the fire, there was suddenly a terrible female cry of pain. The Countess's self-portrait was burned, and her black soul went where it belonged. I hope we won't go to jail for defacing other people's property. Rita laughed nervously.
No, there's no one.
What do you mean?
I think the last owner was among them. Nastya nodded sadly at the pile of ashes. The friends looked at the burning fire, each of them thinking about something else.
What are we going to do?
We'll live on. Besides, we have to go to work tomorrow. Rita hummed and went into the house.
The future fate of the friends turned out quite well. Rita turned out to be a brave young lady, and a few years later organized her own business. Nastya at first rushed from one job to another, until she found herself in creativity. By that time, she was already married to a wealthy man who loved his wife very much. At her request, he bought an old manor house from the city which he restored. Now Nastya and her husband live in that very manor and paint portraits of unknown people. Make the background music mystical horror music.